Hello, my name is Stephen Taylor, and I'm one of the chief moderators employed by CIPD to set questions for the Level 7 qualification, the Advanced Diploma, and also to help with the process of moderating the marks once they've been marked by all the tutors in the different centres around the country. And my purpose in this presentation is to give you some general guidance and some assistance, some support really, as you approach your assignment for the 7C002 module, which is People Management and Development Strategies for Performance. Have the next slide, please. So what we're going to do in this little webinar is I'm going to start with some general guidance for you, a little bit of background as to what we're looking for in general terms from level 7 assignments, and then a little bit of specific guidance, pointers really, about how you might consider tackling each of the questions which we set for this year. Now, they're not all going to be ones that you end up writing, but you need to have a look at all of them, plan each of them so that you make sure you're meeting all the learning outcomes that the CIPD has set. We have the next slide, please. So we're going to start with some general guidance. The other thing I would just say at this stage is if you have any questions, if there's anything I say that you would like some more information about, the best place to start is your own tutors. They are very practiced and experienced at marking and teaching on the CIPD programs, and they will be able to give you much more assistance. I'm only going to be able to skirt the surface in this short presentation. Have the next slide, please. Okay, so C002, People Management and Development Strategies for Performance, is a core unit. That means that everybody does this. Not an elective, it's one that is studied by everyone who is doing the CIPD Level 7 qualification. And the assessment is an essay-based assessment, and it's one that we set. And it's made up of lots and lots of different questions. So we set 17 questions each year to cover the 17 assessment criteria that make up the C002 unit. There are 4 learning outcomes, and 3 of those have 4 assessment criteria associated with them. The other one has 5 assessment criteria associated with it. And therefore we set 17. And you, as your assessment window approaches, will know which of 4 of these, one from each learning outcome, you will be addressing. You have the next slide, please. So what we need from you, what we're looking for from you, is 4 answers to the 4 particular questions that are relevant to you for your assessment window. And we are asking for answers of around 1,000 words to each of those 4 questions. Although there is a fair amount of flexibility there, what we really need is a total piece of work, single document, 4 questions of around 1,000 words each, but 4,000 words in total. And there is some flexibility about the ground total as well, because we allow plus or minus 10%. You go up to 4,400 words if you want to, and it does exclude your references as well, that word count. So that's what we're really looking for. 4 distinct answers of around 1,000 words each, presented as a single document. And when we're marking these, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking first of all, of course, for good knowledge and understanding. And we want depth of knowledge and understanding, but also breadth of knowledge and understanding in respect of each of the learning outcomes which form part of the standard of the syllabus. Importantly also, we really want you to develop and justify an original argument. We don't simply want you to summarize your reading. We certainly don't want you simply to write anecdotally about your own experience and your own kind of hunches about what should be done. We do need to see a really well thought through original argument where you set out what your view is, what you think about the question, and then justify that. And you can justify it with reference to your reading, reference to your experience, reference to published research, statistics, and particularly examples. It's so easy to assume that your argument is self-explanatory, that it doesn't need to be justified because it's obvious the point you're making. Please don't fall into that way of thinking. We really do need to see you justifying your argument. So it's what you think and why. And we want the argument to be as persuasive and credible and well informed as possible. And we do need also to see evidence of wider reading. So we need to see citations, we need to see you reference your reading in your answers. And obviously, we want those references to be to sources which are very credible, robust, authoritative, and which carry some weight. And then your argument will be persuasive, which is what we're looking for. So a well-informed, full, direct, thoughtful, well-referenced set of answers. Next slide, please. Other things we're looking for? Well, at level 7, it is necessary to demonstrate that you have become what is known as an independent learner. In other words, you are comfortable, proficient at finding your own information, going out, looking for the evidence you need, looking for articles, looking for examples in order to build your own case in answer to the question. We also want to know that you have read reasonably widely, that you have an interest, you're engaged in the subject that you're writing about, and that you are able not just simply to demonstrate that you've read, but that you also are comfortable critiquing what you've read, that you question, not necessarily to disagree, but you approach your reading perhaps with a sense of skepticism. You are looking to be convinced yourself. And then you'll be able to develop your own argument, drawing on your reading to justify your key points. In terms of the style, lots of freedom here, really. We're not looking for a particular writing style. All we ask for is that you write to a broad professional standard. So grammatically correct, no spelling mistakes, concise, clear, well expressed in straightforward business English, business language. Next slide, please. Okay, so those are the general points and the general guidance that I would like to give you. What we now need to do is look at each of those 17 questions. Again, we are hoping that you will be able to plan answers to all of them and be confident about answering all of them. That is the way that you demonstrate that you are meeting all the learning outcomes, all the assessment criteria. But we are only going to actually formally assess you on 4. 1 from each of the 4 learning outcomes. So I'm going to talk you through all 17 questions, but it's clear that only 4 of these will be relevant to any particular student, particular to you, for a specific assessment window. Okay, so we'll go through them all. The first 4 deal with the first learning outcome and so on through to the 17. So I'll just give you a little bit of really suggested pointers for each of these questions. Okay, so we have the first one. Okay, so I'll read each of them out and then say a little bit about how I might tackle it myself if I was doing this. So the first question is fostering, starts with a quote, fostering employee well-being is good for people and the organization. Drawing upon published research, produce a business case that explains how promoting well-being strategies can benefit all stakeholders within an organization. Now, see, the great danger when writing about employee well-being, and it's quite understandable, is that we write from an employee perspective. We focus on the employee interest. We focus on uh, health, well-being issues, and we perhaps take an ethical approach to this rather than necessarily thinking always about a business case. This question specifically asks about all stakeholders. So that would potentially involve customers, suppliers, as well as managers, the owners of a business, and the people who work for it. And we're looking here for a business case. So that needs to be the focus of your answer. What is the business case? Why is it in the interest both of the employer and the employee, and potentially other stakeholders too, that well-being is actively promoted in an organization? So a good business case, use up-to-date research. There is a lot written about this currently. This is a very fashionable, live, contemporary issue in the field of HR, field of people management. Read widely, draw on your research, and justify with examples. This is a very good question for using examples to justify the key points that you're making. We have question 2, please. So question 2, to what extent do you agree with the view that it is the responsibility of the head of the people function to ensure that employment policies and practices always support the achievement of an organization's current strategic objectives? Explain how this is achieved in your organization or one that is familiar to you, and justify your answer. Now, 2 parts to this question. And it's important whenever we have a 2-part question that you give decent attention to both parts in your answer. It doesn't mean they have to be precisely equal, the way that you allocate words to them, but we need to see that you're looking at both of them. And the first of the questions asks you to say the extent to which you agree with the view. Now, all I would say there is look very carefully at what you're being asked to agree or disagree with. Is it the responsibility of the head of the people function to ensure that employment policies and practices always support the achievement of an organization's current strategic objectives? And I would suggest that once you read it carefully like that, you may think that that's true to an extent, but that there is a lot more to what the head of the people function does and what employment policies and practices should be about. So that's the first part. And the second part, rather more straightforward, is looking at your own organization, or as always, when we ask questions about your organization, one that is familiar to you. So focus on how it's done in your organization, to what extent are current organizational strategic objectives being supported by your people management function, the policies and practices you operate. So critically assess what you're doing in your organization about this now. And remember, for all of these things, whatever we're asking you to do, take care to justify your answer. So this is what I think, and this is why. And these are the statistics, these are the examples, these are the research findings, these are just the logical points that I'm going to make in order to justify the argument I'm making and make it really credible. We have question number 3, please. So number 3, why is it challenging to bring about significant long-term improvements in an organization's culture? Illustrating your answer with examples, evaluate what role the HR or HRD function can play in helping to meet these challenges. Well, I think the starting point here would be a short definition of what we mean by culture. There are different definitions, so you need to start by setting the terms for your answer, not at any great length, but just for the purposes of your answer, this is how you're going to define the term organizational culture. And we're talking here about bringing about change to that culture, positive change for the better. We're looking to improve the existing organizational culture. So why is that difficult? That's the first question? Why is that a challenging thing to do? And then, having done that, we then talk about the particular role that HR and HRD can play in helping to achieve long-term improvements in an organization's culture. Of course, it's difficult because we're talking here about hearts and minds. It's therefore not just in the gift of managers to bring about cultural change or cultural improvement in an organization. It's not something that can be done with management diktat, like you can bring about structural change or technological change just by saying, well, this is how it will be. That may not always be the best way of doing it if you want people to come with you on the journey, but you can do it. But a culture can't. You can't just demand that it changes. It's therefore inevitably challenging. And there are all kinds of different ways in which HR and indeed specifically really HRD can be used, interventions that you can make to try to push things, nudge things over a long time. It doesn't happen overnight, over a long time to improve the culture of an organization. Again, this question specifically asks for examples to illustrate your key points, and you might look both at successful and at unsuccessful episodes where organizations have tried to improve their culture in order to justify the key points that you want to make here. Okay, could we have question number 4? Okay, number 4. You are asked to make a 30-minute presentation at a local CIPD branch meeting. The subject is a critical evaluation of systemic thinking and how it can help solve people management problems. And you're asked simply to state what the 3 key points you would make in your talk would be and why you've chosen those 3 key points. So you're not asked to write the whole script of a whole talk or anything like that, just to set out the 3 most important points that you would want to make. And I guess the key thing here really is to try and avoid too much theory. Not because it's unimportant, but because you've got to tailor the answer to your audience. And this is a 30-minute presentation at a local CIPD branch meeting. So we can be quite brief on theory, perhaps concentrate a little bit on a definition as one of your points. What is systemic thinking? But if it was me, I would try to avoid overcomplicating this. I would treat it fairly straightforwardly, and I would focus on some of the problems that systemic thinking can help us to overcome, because they affect multiple parts of an organization's system. I've given some examples on this slide, sort of things you might like to look at: staff shortages, staff turnover, absence management, engaging people, building high trust relationships. Any of these or others would be good potential examples to use as the basis of this answer. And then again, as always, justify your points. Why have you chosen these 3 points? Why are these important? Why are they clearly linked to systemic thinking? So keep it fairly straightforward and light on theory. Okay, moving on to question number 5. Examine the merits. I think we should perhaps say the relative merits of high road and low road approaches to the management of performance and productivity in employing organizations. How far do you agree with the view that high road approaches are always preferable, both for employees and employers? Justify your answer with reference to examples of your reading. Well, again, if I was to tackle this, I would start with some definitions, because these terms high road and low road can mean different things to different people. So I think we need to start by saying, in terms of performance and productivity, what do we mean by these 2? Essentially, the difference is that a low road approach involves cutting costs, trying to extract more work out of people. Intensifying work is the expression that's sometimes used. Just basically trying to get more out of your workforce while paying them less. And then the high road approach is about raising productivity in a way which lifts performance, but also is in the interest of employees too. So everybody benefits. And the question really says, do you agree that high road approaches are always preferable? Well, um, depends really on the industry and the economics of the industry. Do remember that it is always in the interests of employees as well as employers for their organizations to be financially successful. And it may be there are certain industries, just because the economics of the industry is such, that a high road approach, while being really nice and pleasant type of working environment, is not going to be appropriate for that particular industry. And therefore, there's a little bit of nuance here that we need to take account of. Think about job security as well as the experience of working when answering this question. And again, the question specifically asks for examples, so you justify your answer with examples. And it's asking for examples from your reading, not just from your own experience. You could bring your own experience into this, but we also need reference to examples from reading, because that is what the specific question is asking about. Okay, can we have question 6? There has been extensive research evidence that links people management practices with improved business performance. Selecting one piece of research, critically evaluate its main findings and identify 3 factors that need to be in place to create an environment which will maximize the effectiveness and impact of people management within organizations. Fully justify these with reference to your wider reading. Well, again, you see here there are 2 parts to this question. They're linked, but there are 2 parts. So one is about critically assessing a specific piece of research, and the other is drawing from that research, or from this research, this body of research generally, 3 factors which are pertinent to people management and the success of an organization. You should be familiar with this body of research. It's a core part of the syllabus for this unit. If it was me, I think I would choose as my one piece of research to critically evaluate. I think I would choose one of the classic studies, the ones that have been around quite a while and have been heavily influential. Lots written about them, including some critical stuff written about them. So I'd think about the work of Jeffrey Pfeffer. I'd think about the work of Mark Huslid, potentially, the Gallup studies, the Black Box studies. These should be familiar to you, as they are the classic basis of so much current research on the link between HR, people management, and subsequent business performance. And you'll find that within those, different factors are discussed. And again, we're looking really for 3 distinct factors. So different types of intervention that these bodies of research suggest, or ways of doing things that these bodies of research suggest, can assist, can make people management stronger in terms of its capacity to add value to the organization. So again, lots of references, some examples, all of those things justifying your answer. We have question 7, please. Discuss the resource-based approach to developing people strategies within organizations, critically evaluating its suitability or not for developing these strategies within your own organization, or one that is familiar to you. Fully justify your conclusions. Well, again, with the resource-based approach, resource-based thinking, it's very easy to slip into a discussion of theory. This is something, again, you should be familiar with from your studies. It's not always easy to get your head around it. But essentially, the resource-based approach is about leveraging existing strengths, identifying what your organization does well, what it has going for it in the people management field in its favor. That might be, for example, its culture, maybe its reputation, it may be the particular capacities, the particular competencies of existing staff, maybe its knowledge management systems, whatever it may be. There are lots of different potential areas. And then it's about building on those. So you take your existing strengths and you make them stronger still. And that is the basis of the people management strategy that is followed by the organization. So avoid too much theory, focus on the practice, focus on your own organization. What are its strengths? What are the ways in which you do things in a distinct way from others, a better way than others? How strongly are those embedded in the culture and the methods of your organization? And think about the potential for improving those. I don't really like this expression, leveraging, but that's the one that's commonly used, leveraging them to achieve and maintain a greater level of competitive advantage. So I'd keep it very practical and again, justify your arguments. Why? Relate it to a resource-based approach, but don't get too bogged down in the theory here. Okay, could we have question 8? Explain the view that high performance work practices benefit both employers and employees when they are introduced or enhanced. Illustrate your answer with examples. So, again, pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with high performance work practices, I would start with a definition of what we mean by the term high performance work practices. And then think about how far they benefit both employers and employees. And again, think quite broadly about this. Think about the different elements that make up a bundle of high performance work practices. Do both the employer and the employee benefit equally? In what different ways do they benefit? Do sometimes one side benefit more than the other? These are the questions that we're asking you to explore here. And again, examples are central. Lots of examples by way of justification for your general point. So it's actually a pretty straightforward question. But again, you obviously need to start with a full understanding of what exactly we mean by a high performance or by a bundle of high performance work practices. We have question 9. People Management on the 21st of April 2023 reported that almost half of HR professionals claim they are dealing with more employee relations issues than before COVID. Discuss how people professionals can adopt an effective approach to managing employee relations issues. Justify your answer by drawing upon academic theory and research evidence. So again, we have a two-part question here. The first is very current. It's about what's happening presently. And this answer does need to be focused very much in the present. There have been all kinds of difficult employee relations issues post-COVID. I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of them from your work. Things related to home working, coming back to the office after a period when we worked away from the office. That's certainly one of them. And then we have had, obviously, something of a cost of living crisis, which is partly generated by COVID and the build-up of pent-up demand and skill shortages and so on following COVID. That's led to higher inflation, and that, of course, has also led to all kinds of difficult employee relations issues for all of us. We're all tending to suffer from the cost of living crisis. So those are the sort of things we're looking for here. And the question is really what people, professionals can do to effectively deal with that. What are the issues? I think it's important here to take a broad view. This isn't an own organization question. So perhaps look at union environments and non-union environments, distinguish between the two. Again, give examples, current examples, and also, as always, justify your answer. But the question here specifically asks for reference to be made to theory and research evidence. So we need to do that too. So it's really, I think, looking at well-established research in the contemporary context. That's essentially what we're looking for with this question. We have question number 10. The CIPD in 2022 described the Great Resignation as a pandemic-induced re-evaluation of what people want from work, with a suggestion that people will no longer put up with bad work. Again, two parts. Draw upon your wider reading to evaluate the evidence for the Great Resignation And two, identify two specific actions organizations can take in order to combat any trends towards a great resignation. Um, Again, I hope you're familiar with the term great resignation. It's certainly of more relevance in some industries than others. But essentially, what we're talking about here is people not wanting to return to work post-pandemic, particularly people who had a period on furlough, just not wanting to return either to the same jobs or to any job. We have had a large increase in the number of people taking early retirement, for example. But actually, more commonly, it's people doing other things during the pandemic and then not wanting to return to their old jobs. That is what we term, have termed, is commonly termed the Great Resignation. So evaluate that, look at the evidence for it. You could look internationally here actually, because it does vary from country to country. And then identify two things that any organization could do that was affected by the Great Resignation to combat this, to reduce its significance, to um, mean that you didn't suffer from a Great Resignation. Again, lots of different things that you could do there. I think it might be helpful to focus on older people because it tends to be older people who have a choice about whether they work or not and can take early retirement. Be a lot fruitful avenues there to look at with this question. But it's up to you. You can think about your own industry specifically, your own experience. Whatever we do, we need examples and we need reference to wider reading. We have question 11, please. Question 11 is evaluate the increased appetite among employees for more learning and development opportunities at work and evaluate how organizations can respond to this. Illustrate your answer with examples, I think that should say. Well, I think here the first thing to say is why is it? Why is it that there's a greater appetite for learning and development opportunities presently? And again, I think there you need to think about the wider trends in the business environment, particularly the rate of change and the need for people to continually adapt if they want to get on career-wise, retrain and so on in order to make or take full advantage of technological change, but also structural change in our economies as well. Those are the sort of things I think we're tapping into there. And then the second the second part, the key there really is the word evaluate. Don't just describe, don't just say, here are two ways in which we can improve learning development opportunities. I mean, that's very straightforward, but we're asking for evaluation. We want to know what you think. We want you to critically assess and to illustrate your answer with examples too. Could we have question 12? So question 12 is another one about employee relations. Such a big issue presently, but this one's less about post-pandemic specifically and more about other things, although sometimes these are related to the pandemic. Employment relations within the UK are turbulent, with high levels of disputes and strike action. Evaluate the opportunities for and barriers to HR sustaining effective employee relationships during these turbulent times. Well, again, I think we need to start here with some explanation of what we mean by turbulent times. What's causing the high levels of dispute, the levels of strike action? It's partly cost of living, but it's also the fact that the unemployment rate is very low and that people are risking entering disputes because they don't fear so much for their job future in a tight labour market. They're less likely to be made redundant, but they also can find alternative employment very quickly if they need to. So there's that background, and I think that needs to be explained at the start because this is about current developments in employee relations. And the second part then is evaluate the opportunities for and barriers to HR sustaining effective employment relationships during these turbulent times. Well, there is a limit to what you can do because a lot of it's outside your control. So you are inevitably struggling You do what you can within the restrictions that the situation provides from an HR point of view. I think the key thing really is to think in terms of opportunities as well as managing it on a day-to-day basis. There are always opportunities that come from these kind of situations, opportunities to reset psychological contract, to think in terms of potential win-win outcomes, both for the employer and for staff. As a we means potentially, for example, of improving productivity as a response. Put simply, you could end up with fewer people paid more. So your overall wage bill would be controlled. You would have productivity savings and therefore fewer people you would employ, but you would be able to afford to pay them more. Creative approaches, that kind of thing, I think is helpful. And again, we're looking for examples to illustrate key points. Justify what you say. Don't just make the general point like I just have, but say, this is a general point, and here are some examples to show that it can be done, that it can be effective. And you'll get that from wide reading. Question 13, please. Examine the ways in which the impact of people practices can be evaluated within your organization or one that is familiar to you. What are the main barriers to evaluation? And illustrate your answer with examples. Well, again, evaluation of HR policy and practice is part of the syllabus, part of the CIPD standards for this module. So you should be familiar with that broad area. There are many different ways in which we can evaluate people practices in organizations. Sometimes it's done quantitatively, sometimes it's done qualitatively, sometimes it's done very sophisticated ways using metrics and so on, ratios. Other times it's done in a quite simple way, for example, an evaluation following a training course where you're just simply asking participants for their perspective, their view, their ideas as to its strengths and weaknesses, all of these different things. So we're talking here about a big range of possibilities. The question asks you to focus on your organization, but it's again necessary when we have that, not simply to describe what you currently do. We need to look ahead. And what are the big barriers? Often it's technology, cost, lack of expertise, sometimes just lack of management will to do it. Either way, we want you to set out what the main barriers are, focus on your own organization, and again, use specific examples to justify the arguments that you put forward. Question 14, please. The CIPD's purpose is to champion better work and working lives. Critically assess how the CIPD's purpose can be implemented in your organization or one that is familiar to you, and then justify your answer. Well, starting point really here is to check out the CIPD's website. There's plenty on there about championing better work and working lives, which is very much the priority, has been for some time. So we need to establish, first of all, exactly what we mean by this rather general phrase. What does it mean in practice? And then think about the extent to which that could be better implemented in either your organization or another one that you're familiar with. And again, it's not a question of describing, certainly not just simply describing what currently happens in your organization, but think about how things could be made better and critically assess. You may not agree that everything in the better work and working lives statements is so relevant to your organization. Again, the economic reality of the situation you're in may make it seem a little bit idealistic. Well, that's fine. Say that. We're asking here for a critical assessment, not just a description, not just an expression of knowledge and understanding. We want to know what you think. We want to know your argument. We want to know why you've come to the conclusion you have. And that can be quite a sophisticated and thoughtful argument. In fact, it's great when it is. Again, it's all in the justification. Don't just set out your argument, but justify your argument too. Question 15, please. Analyze the opportunities for drawing upon insights from customers and stakeholders in order to inform people practices within your organization, or one that is familiar to you. Illustrate your answer with examples. Again, this is so interesting. And again, sometimes people find it strange, the idea, well, what do you mean insights from customers and stakeholders? But when you think about it, actually, it's entirely normal. It's essentially getting feedback from the people who your employees, your staff interact with about the way that they provide a service. And then to take that information and use it to improve the people management practices that you are involved in. So with customers, it's customer feedback. Now that can either be online, short survey questionnaires, or in the case of long-term clients where you have a good, decent long-term relationship, the particular client is a big part of your business, you're going to want to form a much closer relationship. You can have user groups, and you're going to be very, very keen on making sure that relationship stays good. And that will involve getting feedback on the levels of service, the type of service, the way that you do things. And then it makes sense to action those or take action points from that feedback when determining how to improve your people management practices. This question asks customers and stakeholders. So there are other stakeholders as well, potentially a local community, certainly suppliers, other organizations that you interact with as part of your organization's day-to-day activity, and individuals in those organizations. And again, don't just describe what currently happens. This is about analyzing the opportunities. What could be better done? You may already in your organization be doing a lot of this. How could it be made better? Don't just describe what currently happens. That's what we're really looking for here. And again, we need a business case. Set out why it would be a good thing, why it's worth spending some money, some tension, some management time on these kind of activities. We move to question 16. So question 16, drawing upon your wider reading, assess the business case for creating a coaching culture within your organization, or one that is familiar to you. So again, this is asking you to look specifically at the literature on the idea of coaching, and particularly the development of a coaching culture in the organization. And you may consider that, well, you already do this in your organization. You already have a coaching culture in your organization. Well, in which case, think about the business case for improving it, for going further in this area. So we need to certainly start with a definition. We need to start with an evaluation of exactly how strong your organization currently is against that definition, and then look at how it could be improved. Again, do take a critical perspective. Think critically about this issue. You may disagree that there's a strong business case for creating a coaching culture, or for investing a lot of resources in improving a current situation which is reasonable and good. That's just fine. And again, it's helpful to illustrate it with specific examples. Always use examples when you can from your reading, also potentially from your own experience when answering this question. Which brings us to the final question, question 17, and that is, the challenge facing the profession is best characterized by the common expression, I'm a people person, not a numbers person, which exists in pockets throughout the profession. That's a statement. It's a commonly expressed point of view in the HR field. Critically evaluate how you can address this challenge within your organization, or one that is familiar to you, in order to use insights from people data to inform the business. So this is really looking at what we call HR analytics. It's the use of data, numbers, in order to inform broader decision making in the field of people management. And that is cutting edge. It's something that is currently very fashionable, very topical. The use of data, data mining, the extent to which IT packages are available to help do this, enormous potential in HR for the use of data analytics, but we're a little bit behind the curve. Not every organization, but a lot of organizations are not making full use of the potential. And the reason for this is that often we don't have the expertise. We have a lot of people in HR who come into the role because they are interested in the softer side of HR, the relationship side rather than the transactional side, not so comfortable with IT. I am myself such a person. And therefore, it is an issue that we face in the profession. We need to become much more savvy, much more competent in dealing with the numbers, in dealing with the data, in dealing with the IT systems and so on. So this question is really asking you to explain that, explore that, and then to say, well, what can be done about it? And again, to focus on your own organization when saying what can be done about it. So it's going to be about HRD, it's going to be about recruitment strategies, it potentially be about branding and issues of that kind. Maybe potentially about seconding people into HR from other parts of the organization. All of these things would be the sort of things that we would be looking for there. And again, use your experience, use your reading to justify the arguments that you make in answer to that question. Okay, can we have the final slide, please? Okay, so there we go. I've gone through each of the 17 questions. I'm giving a few pointers, a few suggestions, a few ideas. Please don't assume that my ideas must be used. Please take what I've said as examples. It may be that your own tutors would advise you differently. It may be that you prefer to take the answer in a different direction. That's just fine. Level 7, there are no perfect answers. It's all about originality. It's about developing a thoughtful argument and justifying that thoughtful argument. So that's really important. But I hope you find it helpful, both the general advice I gave at the start and also the specific advice about the 17 questions we set for this year. Okay, good luck, everyone.